And I had a chance to talk with Sonia about what it's like to be both blue and black at this historical moment in American society.
So all of this is really quite a shock in terms of all of the things that are happening all at the same time. There's a lot of energy from so many different factions, from the police, from the community. It's difficult for some people to manage, including police officers. So here we are now today, and it's been several days of protests and other activity related to the protests that are going on where there's destruction of property. And so police officers they have their work cut out for them in many ways. They have their work cut out for them on the front lines, trying to handle the protests and then the things that are happening surrounding the protests with criminal activity. And then they're also having to handle the mental issues concerning the death of Mr. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery.
It's particularly confusing at this point when there's now a message from the president saying crack down hard with very sort of imprecise language, and various states with various governors who may feel differently. How do you and your association members weigh in on this?
So listen, we're for the protection and the safeguard of our public, our citizens. Our job is to protect and serve. And when you start using language like cracking down, that brings a whole nother element into what's happening. As a matter for me, it triggers thoughts of the 60s. That's what officers were doing during those protests. They were cracking down on those people who they did not appreciate and what they were doing. They didn't like the protest. They didn't like why these people were protesting. And, I am hesitant, and I think we should be hesitant about thinking about this at all, but cautious that law enforcement would go in to do any cracking down of any citizens. If you want to go and handle the situation appropriately, then that's one thing. But it's the language that I am, and I'm sure the members of our organization would feel it's just too much.
Well, tell me, what is it? Like, what needs to be done? I think there's so much frustration when you see St. Patrick's Cathedral defaced and then the Lincoln Memorial defaced and all these shop owners and independent business people, many of them minority owned, losing their livelihoods. If it's not a crackdown, what is it that will send a message or at least stop this mayhem?
Yeah. So, I hate to go back to the past, but we have not learned from the past. This dam was going to break at some point. It's like shaking up a soda can until when you open the top, it just bursts, it fizzes, because we have not handled issues in this country regarding race and regarding the race relationship between the police and in particular the Black community. So now we have this. We should have anticipated that something like this might happen. People have been talking about it for a very long time. Like, when is this going to stop? And now here we are. So when you approach the protest, when you approach the criminal activity surrounding the protest, you're going to have to approach it with some understanding about why the protests are happening. You don't want to add on to the tension, especially the racial tension. You want to handle your business as law enforcement, and you want to handle it well. But you're not going in there cracking down. When I hear cracking down, I hear they're going to rip out some batons and beat people upside the head, and maybe even some dogs and hoses. That's what that brings, the image it brings for me.
Where are we going from here? Where will we end up?
After the calm returns and we get things under control, there are going to be some asks. We're going to ask our legislatures to take a look at the laws concerning how police officers are held accountable, for instance. There should be a national registry where a police officer who does wrong has his or her name placed, and then they cannot be hired somewhere else in the country, because that's an issue. We need to take a look at our use of force laws. We need some action. We need to have law behind those actions. And so those are some of the things that we're looking for. There are many, many other things that I think that we could ask for, but the law is really, really important, and it needs to support the people that we're supposed to be protecting and serving.
It's happened before. We've had these riots, we've had these protests, we've had the deaths, we've covered it, and yet it keeps happening. white president, black president, doesn't seem to make a difference. Are we going to be okay? Are we going to make it out of this?
I'm an optimist at heart, so I would say yes. But again, I am not interested, and neither is my organization interested in going backwards. It's time to take some very, very courageous stands, and it has to be about more than just some words and having a nice conversation. It really, really has to be about putting some action behind it. So we're going to have to press people, the people who can actually make these changes. And you know what else we're going to have to do? And I love when President Obama said this: vote. We're going to have to vote. We know what our needs are, and we need to find people who are going to make sure those needs are afforded.
There's a huge group of Americans who are so angry at what's happening to the police right now as they see them pelted with rocks and bottles. And there's a huge group of Americans who are so angry when they see an officer kneeling on, a man's neck until he dies. And yet you're an officer and you represent Black officers. How are you putting all these pieces into place?
I think it's probably because I've had a lot of practice. Our membership has had a lot of practice. You kind of find a place where you're okay. You recognize you're going to see some things on both sides. The death of Mr. Floyd is horrific. Personally, I when I think about that, and it's been hard to deal with. I think about why we exist as police. Sir Robert Peel, he is considered the father of modern day policing. He was from the UK. He created the Bobbies. And he also had a set of principles for ethical policing. And all of those principles centered around the fact that we are here to serve the public. Even the angry, pissed off public, we're here to serve them. That is why we took this job. That's what we swore to do. And I have to tell you, as a Black officer, I know this. Because policing originated during the slave patrols so many centuries ago, we know why it was created, why policing was created. And we know that it was not created for us, but to keep us subjugated and oppressed. But I cannot think of a better officer than a Black officer to be law enforcement, because we understand the compassion that all communities need.
Do you find that what's happening right now is polarizing police forces?
I think it's given those white officers who always kind of felt like, yeah, there's something wrong going on in this country between the police and the Black community. It's given them an opening to express themselves safely, whereby before, if they raised a hand in protest, they might have been ostracized, or because that happens to Black officers. They might have been ostracized, or someone might have treated them differently, one of their peers or coworkers. But now they see an opportunity to also speak out amongst a group of people who will support where they are. We're the National Black Police Association. We're not going to turn anyone away who helps with our mission of making sure there's equity in the community. Okay, and that includes all of our peers. We want them to understand that if we could just have everyone have some understanding of why this has been such an issue for so many decades.
So I think, Ted, what's so fascinating is that, Sonia Pruitt said the same words that George Floyd's brother even said today when he, went back to the site where his brother was arrested. And he said, we don't want the violence. We want you to vote. And that's the same thing that Sonia Pruitt said, is that this is the voice that needs to be heard from the African-American community, is to vote. And that's the most powerful message you can send, certainly as an agent of change. But I just found it really interesting to listen. You and I have interviewed over the many years that we've been doing this police officers, and they always talk in cop speak. That cop speak is very official language. It's always sort of tailored. And Sonia spoke to me sort of woman to woman. And I just felt that there was a real emotional exchange of, let's be Americans and let's look forward. We're not going backwards. Let's look forward. I think that's number one. Her message was, we need to talk and we all need to listen. So I found that to be a really fascinating interview, specifically because of the Black and blue that she represents.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing she said really stuck out, that the dam was going to break at some point. And the question now is, all right, when the dam is rebuilt on some level, is the pressure going to then continue to build, or will there be changes? Will this just be, as you mentioned, a reoccurring situation? Did she give insight in terms of the differences between white and black officers, and I know she mentioned it a little bit there in the interview, but is that it seems to me that's a big part of this as well. It's reaching out to communities as police officers. I mean, if every cop was just like her, I don't think we'd have the problems that we do.
Right. And of course, there's no magic bullet, right? And I'm sorry for that reference, but there's certainly no panacea here. No one has the automatic cure for what ails America when it comes to this kind of social crisis. However, one thing she did say I thought was pretty profound, and that was that when she sees white officers today kneeling and, taking a knee, just like Colin Kaepernick, in deference to the protesters, she says that's very strong. But she said, I have yet to hear it vocalized that it's good to take a knee, but then there needs to be that follow-up saying, I will not stand for any further police violence. Listen, there's argument on both sides. Police have a really violent job. Every day they put their lives in danger and on the line. And a lot of officers will say, for God's sake, we have to be able to do our jobs. And sometimes it gets messy and it gets ugly. And we can't people can't jump to conclusions. But what Sonia would like to see is that if you're going to take a knee and then follow it up with a further action. And that is to say, I won't stand for any police violence, and I will make my voice heard as a white officer or as any other female officer, any kind of officer. I will make my voice heard, as well as these visuals that we're seeing on television. She said it's all important, but that we all have to speak and listen and move forward.
I know
not continue the cycle.
Yeah, I do know a lot of our viewers are very disgusted by what they're seeing now in the aftermath in cities outside of Minneapolis. Every state in this country is dealing with it on some level, where there's the looting and there is the violence and there is the absolutely abuse of police officers, like you mentioned, throwing urine at them. She didn't really give an answer to how do you deal with it? How do you stop that in the short term?
Yeah, there isn't really a short term, other than the fact that she said one thing that needs to be in the back of your mind, if not in the middle or forward of your mind, if you're an officer policing right now, is that you need to be mindful of the people you're policing, because there's a nuance there, right? This is somebody who's being pressed to the point of saying, ow. That's the real microcosm of it, right? Don't tell them not to say, ow. Figure out a way to take the pressure off. Going in with a battering ram and dogs and batons conjures up the images of the 60s. It adds fuel to the fire, as she says, for many people. This is not an easy metric by any means. And like I said, no one has the perfect solution. It will be a gradual effort. Tonight, tomorrow, the next night. I think this is not something that anybody can answer. How do we actually stop this? But continuing the way we're continuing is not going to change anything tonight, tomorrow, or next year, or in 10 years. I think that's the bigger point she's trying to make.
Right.
We'll get past this inflection point. We'll get past it. It's what we're going to do afterwards that she really wants to focus on.
Yeah, I think you could argue continuing it in the short term, where we are right now, is not sustainable. And in the long term, where we have gotten to get that dam to break in the first place, is also not sustainable. It will happen again. Ashley Banfield, thank you. Fascinating interview.